Hello, everybody. This is Dan Eisenberg, and we're together again for Scale Up Podcast. Guess what? This is episode number 19, and we're really accruing a lot of information, a lot of examples, a lot of great stories about companies that are growing, and companies that are growing in all kinds of industries. You know, we've had high-tech, vertical SaaS companies, and we've had hardware companies, and we've had also chain of car washes in Northeast Ohio that's growing rapidly. So we have no bias about the kinds of companies. We do have a bias about growth. We really care that you all can learn how to grow and grow more effectively, more profitably, looking into the future for your own wealth, for your own excitement, and for the impact that you have on your customers, on your communities, all kinds of reasons why growth is important. Well, enough of all of that. I'm really excited to have with me Blair Hyslop and Rosalyn or Roz Hyslop, who are friends. They also participate in a program that we run in Atlantic Canada, around New Brunswick. That's called the Scale Up Atlantic Canada. We haven't done it for a little while, but they participated in the Scalerator of that program. So just say hi, Blair and Roz.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
Hi there. Yeah, this is awesome. Thank you.
It's always a pleasure to see you guys. Let's start off by you telling us about yourselves individually, but don't say anything about the business. It's
Okay.
Mrs. Dunster. I'll tell everyone that, but don't say anything about the business. Just tell who you are without the business.
Oh, wow, who we are. So, I guess if you're looking at our story individually, Rosalyn and I, our story is that we actually met in junior achievement, and Rosalyn participated in New Brunswick in junior achievement when she was in high school, and I participated in Nova Scotia, and I was the Achiever of the Year for Nova Scotia in 1987, and she was the Achiever of the Year for New Brunswick in 1988, and then we both volunteered to the organization, and they paired us up to go into high schools and talk to students about junior achievement and that entrepreneurial program, and so that's how we met, ironically. And then on our first date, we talked about one day having our own business together, and then we got married and had kids, and career and jobs and other things got in the way. But that's how it all started.
Okay, now I want to hear Rosalyn's version. We'll see if it matches.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the same. I think, Blair and I have similar stories of high school, not, bored at school, underachieving, just wasn't our thing. And so when we found junior achievement, we accredit junior achievement for kind of giving us our purpose, and finally figured out what we wanted to be when we grew up, and had no idea about entrepreneurship before that. And so junior achievement as a high school entrepreneurship program was it was life-changing for both of us. So, so that was amazing. And and I think, we just talked over the years all the time about someday having our own business, and really just weren't sure how to do it, and all the things. And but I can tell you that we had a lot of business plans. Most of them were on the backs of placemats from restaurants, which we still have many of, and until the Mrs. Dunster's opportunity came up, when I guess the universe just conspired for us, and everything kind of came together.
So junior achievement, let's stick on that just for a minute. I know about it, and I've run into it a lot, although I think it's kind of low-keyed in terms of the public. What did it do to your self-concepts? Rosalyn, if you'll start, what impact did it have?
Yeah, so I think really just building your confidence, and like we had to do everything, in terms of running a business. We had to run payroll, we had an executive, we had to make a product, we had to sell the product, we had to do a shareholders report, we had to sell shares. Like, really gave you a really good basis of of entrepreneurship and business. And I think the other thing is just, I know Blair and I both in our programs, like we had to take public speaking, you know, programs as part of that. And, you know, so a lot of skills that we still use today and, just a lot of lessons learned early on.
Okay, let's move forward to Mrs. Dunster. And by the way, I hope I'm pronouncing it's Mrs. Dunster, not Mrs. Dunsters, correct?
No, it's
Mrs.
Dunsters with an S.
Dunsters with
Apostrophe
an
S.
Thank you. I got that wrong. Mrs. Dunsters as
yes.
okay. So let's talk about that. And now tell us, why don't you start with you, Rosalyn? What is Mrs. Dunster's? What are you selling to people in terms of the actual tangibles and also the intangibles?
Yeah. So, I think, Mrs. Dunster was a real person and, she started making donuts in a cast iron pot back in the late 60s in her kitchen for her family and friends. And, they convinced her to, uh, put a stand at the end of her road. And then her husband had a bread route. And so he started taking them on his bread route and started selling them in New Brunswick and Maine. And it kind of grew from there. And so I would say that donuts are our main product that we sell. We have a very unique, yummy donut, our different flavors of donuts. And, but we probably make over 400 different bakery items. Pretty much anything you can think of in a bakery, we sell it.
People I've heard people talk about Mrs. Dunster's products and some of their favorite products. One of them had the name cheese in it, if I remember correctly.
Garlic cheese bun.
Garlic
Yeah.
cheese buns.
Cheese buns, right? And it somehow has this emotional impact on people. Say a little bit about that.
Yeah, so we always say the best part of working for Mrs. Dunsters is that when you tell people where you work, they get a big smile on their face and they tell you a story. You know, everybody has a Mrs. Dunster story, and the stories come from the emotional experiences you talk about, Dan. And this is her grandmother's recipe. We still fry donuts in lard the way her grandmother did. It's like eating your grandmother's donut. The garlic cheese buns are unique in that they're they pull apart. There's real garlic butter. There's all natural cheddar cheese on top. These are all sort of really authentic products that don't taste like they came from a commercial bakery. And that's kind of, when people smile and they tell you a story, the story is about the first time, that they had a donut with their grandmother, their grandfather taking them out for a cup of tea and a donut, or a woman who'd be in the store filling a suitcase with her English muffins and taking them to her sister out west that's been diagnosed with breast cancer and said, if you're coming out to look after me, can you go fill the suitcase with Mrs. Dunster's, and we recently had a customer, a buyer for a senior buyer for a chain, and the president of the chain asked him, how do you evaluate a good donut? And the buyer said to him, the best way to answer that is you just need to try a Mrs. Dunster's donut. So it's become the benchmark for sort of home style baking, and in a world where everything seems to be, frozen and more commercially made and more focused on shelf life than quality.
So the two words that come out to me, one is comfort and the other one is authenticity, perhaps, and maybe something intimate as well. But as you expand, and you said, Rosalyn, you have 400 products, is that right? How do you keep that as you grow?
I don't know. Blair might have a different answer on this, but I would say that part of that is just kind of sticking to the roots. Like, we consider ourselves a family business. Mrs. Dunster's has always been a family business, and even the acquisitions that we've done over the years we purchased family businesses and their family recipes. And so just sticking to that authenticity. And also I would say, because Mrs. Dunster's is such a beloved brand in our region, the employees really take pride in that. And so, it's important to them too that we're making, food. And I think too, we always talk about, making sure people understand, like the employees understand that we're making yummy food. We're not, we're not sending out units, we're not sending out, cases. We're sending out food that people are going to eat, and, their kids are going to eat, your grandparents are going to eat. So just being very mindful of what we're making and how we're making it.
A part of that's in the brands that you acquire, and part of it in the products that you're selling. Make sure they have that family home experience, emotion, comfort, etc., authenticity.
Yeah, and then, as we scale up, like we just recently put in a piece of equipment, and we knew, we need to be able to be more productive like anybody else. We need to be able to make a lot of things in a short period of time, and everything we make is fresh. So, if you looked at the contract, these suppliers that supply the industry are the same suppliers that supply the big guys, and they come in with a mindset. We will make 40,000 pieces an hour for you. If you look at the contract that we made them sign, it talks about the texture and the quality and the taste of the product, not the productivity of the piece of equipment they're installing. So if you don't match the texture and the taste and the quality, we don't care how fast and how efficient your piece of equipment is. And
Does that surprise them?
yeah, it did. And when they put in, they came in and they were very confident in their equipment. It's very high quality equipment, but it didn't work. Like, it didn't give us that. And we hauled it out, and we said, we set it up in another part of the bakery, and we said, you go figure that out. And when you match the texture and quality, then we'll come back and we'll put it back into the line, and we'll commercialize it. And we did that. But that was a conscious decision to say, that's the most important thing. 40,000 units an hour is not the most important thing. The texture, we need to replicate that home style taste. We don't want to be like everybody else. We just don't, because we're not going to out white bread the white bread guys,
So
And
there's mentioned a few words that I want to follow up on and go into deeply. One is, as you scale, that was one. The other one is acquisitions. So let's talk about first of all, give us whatever numbers you can give us to give about Mrs. Dunster's. You said 400 products.
yeah,
Could it
so
all? I some idea.
yeah, for sure. So I don't, we'll share some numbers, but when we bought the business, we thought we were buying we did buy an roughly an $8.5 million a year revenue business. And the next day, 24 hours later, we got a phone call, and we lost 15% of our business. So that's how we started. So our $8.5 million business became a $7 million business. So that's what we consider to be our baseline. And today we would be 6 or 7 times larger than that. We've doubled almost 3 times, and we're going to double again here in the next 3 to 5 years.
So talk about the strategies here. Is it acquisitions? Is it organic? How do you manage that at the same time building your capacity and getting the resources to grow?
Yeah, so Rosalyn maybe can talk about growing capacity of the organization, but in terms of how, you know, uh, uh, when I talk to business groups about this, I say, look, we've done 3 acquisitions aside from the initial Mrs. Dunster's acquisition, and they were all very strategic in terms of the impact of the business. But if you look back today, the volume that we acquired, the revenue we acquired, is a very small part of our overall business. So the acquisitions themselves weren't the driver of growth, but the capacity, or the capabilities rather, that those acquisitions gave us, like, got us into the bread and roll business. We weren't in the bread and roll business. Now bread and rolls are 30 to 40% of our business, for example. Now that acquisition would be less than 5% of our total revenue today, but because we're in the bread business, we go out and find more bread customers, for example, and grow that. And we bought some bakeries that had more retail stores. So we have retail stores of our own now that are almost as big as the whole business was when we bought it. So the acquisitions represent a strategic platform for growth, not just growth in themselves in terms of the transactions that we did. And there's lots of road rash around, the capacity and growth of from a HR standpoint, and also from a production standpoint. Rosin, you can talk to that if you like.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think in terms of staffing and growth, we had a lot of struggles in terms of, how much work the two of us were doing in the business, and trying to find that spot. As you're scaling, you might need a person at this skill level and this pay, but you can't, in your mind, you can't really quite afford that person yet. And so you're trying to get by with this person that, is not quite what you need, but, and so we we soon learned that, sometimes you need to make strategic decisions and just hire that person at that scale level, and they end up paying for themselves. And, we have several examples of that where, we just, and sometimes we didn't hire the right person and at that level and had to kind of start over, but still went for that person. And once we got the right person, it was game changing for us. So, just, and then just, we went through a lot of changes in terms of, we opened a brand new, bakery in Moncton, New Brunswick, 40,000 square feet, and during COVID. And so, trying to find staff and, and trying to get that up to, the production levels that we needed was, a huge struggle. And, I think in that, making sure we had the right team there, you know, uh, because of the size, we needed somebody that could handle that capacity. So,
So let's talk about the capacity in the sense that you also need resources, not just human resources, of course, but you need other resources to grow equipment, money, etc. And some of that you get from outside, and some of that you get from making your operation more efficient. I know we've talked about this in the past, but say a little bit about those two ways of getting resources: squeezing the operation and also going outside.
Yeah, the way I describe this in terms of scaling, Dan, is like, when Mrs. Dunster started making donuts, she would, go to the grocery store, buy some flour, pick up some lard, come back, make the donuts, package the donuts. She was probably running the cash register at the front of the shop. She was kind of doing the things. And then her husband, Harold, would take them on his truck and he would do the delivery. And then eventually, as they grew, maybe they hired an operations manager, general manager, somebody that would take on some of that. And then maybe as the company grew, they'd hire a purchasing manager. When we bought the business and it was $7 million, there was a purchasing manager there. And literally the plant manager would yell upstairs, "Hey, Mary, we need more flour," and Mary would pick up the phone and call and order more flour, and you can see the iterations of that systems and processes sort of as it grew. Today, we need a computer to tell us when to order flour, like, and so you go from going to the store to buy flour to needing a computer model that can predict your flour usage so that you can get, each of our bakeries is pulling in truckloads of flour on a weekly basis. So the timing and ordering of that is very important. So, one of the biggest surprises for us, I think, was how much time and effort we need to put on scaling our systems and processes. And in fact, there's 3 years we didn't grow. And the first year of that was when we said, we're going to actively avoid our customers for a while, and we're just going to focus on systems and processes. And then COVID hit and so on. It kind of extended that period of time. But we really needed that time. Like, we were growing at 35% a year for 3 or 4 years in a row. I think 5 years up to that point, and we were just choking on things like ordering flour and having the right people in the right places and all of that. We ran out of money 4 times, because we were growing. And so the working capital needs of the business, were challenging. And we never set out to grow. We didn't say, "Hey, let's buy a business and we'll see if we can 10x it." There's people that do that, but that wasn't us. We just followed our nose and followed the opportunities that our customers put in front of us. And so we weren't, we didn't plan for scaling, we scaled as a consequence of the growth, and we're still doing that.
And
We've grown an average of 20% a year for 11 years, and 3 of those years we didn't grow. So really the average growth for 8 years was more like 30% a year, the years.
what's the vision for the future?
Well, the vision is, not so much in terms of our aspirations, but in terms of what we know. We know that we're going to double in the next probably 3 years, and we know that we're going to double again in the subsequent 5 years after that. And that's just based on the opportunities that are in front of us today. The reality is, even some of the acquisitions that are in front of us today, we could be doing significantly more than that. One of the things about when you start doing acquisitions is every time somebody wants to sell a bakery, we get a phone call because there's a bit of a reputation. So there's lots of opportunities out there like that. So I think what will definitely be 2, 3, 4 times larger than we are. Maybe we'll be 10 times larger. Who knows if by virtue of acquisitions. But again, this is not because we're the most ambitious people on the planet. It's because our customers are pulling us in that direction,
That's
and
interesting.
we're responding to that.
Talk about globalization or internationalization, because I know well, a few years ago, you made an acquisition in the United States, and we're selling there. I don't know if you still are. I don't know what's happening with the tariffs. Maybe nobody knows what's happening with the tariffs, but
Well,
how does that fit into your concept of the future?
Well, we tried to do an acquisition in the US, and it didn't work out. It fell apart at the last minute because one of the big guys came in and kind of took us out. But we still think that that's a great opportunity, and we think that way because that's where we do sell into the United States, and our customers are asking us to do more. We're bigger than the small guys, and we're smaller than the big guys. So that gives us a real niche advantage in the market where we're not so bureaucratic as the big guys, and we don't have all the problems that they bring to the market. But we have the efficiencies and the production capability to match their products and their costing and so on, or pricing. And we're much larger than the small guys, so we can make stuff and get it delivered to grocery stores and restaurants in a timely fashion. So, and tariffs, I think, are forcing us to think beyond just the United States. So we're growing aggressively across Canada, which before we were sort of focused in Atlantic Canada and Maine. Um, and so we are growing in New England. We're growing across Canada. We're now focused on developing some other markets like Mexico and the Caribbean, for example, which historically have strong trading relationships with Atlantic Canada. Um, and we're also aggressively opening stores of our own, because one of the things about being one of the small guys is that the big guys sort of dominate the shelf space in the grocery stores. So if we can open up stores of our own, then that allows us to control our own destiny to some degree, and gives us a great R&D platform for our small batch operations. Act as an R&D platform for our larger customers as well. So that helps us grow. So yeah, so that's our focus.
Rosalyn, what does the future of Mrs. Dunster's look from your perspective?
Um, I think we probably don't know the answer to that except what Blair said, but there's just so many opportunities, and we set out to buy a 7, or I guess $8.5 million business, 11 years ago, and we were going to run that business, and our dream was to have our own family business, and so we're rethinking our future all the time, because we just we did 3 years ago, we did a 5-year plan to grow throughout New England, and we ended up doing it in 8 months in Canada. And so, okay, regroup.
Planning. So much for
What's
planning.
next? And I think like Blair said, a lot of our success has come from, just following the customers and their needs, and, and making sure that they understand what our capabilities are, and what we can do for them. So,
So
yeah, so it's hard to imagine everything. Every new adventure is just exciting, and what's next, and okay, where are we going? And
I can only imagine that, because you two were so aligned from being from teenagerhood when you met, in terms of what you're looking for in life. At least sort of sounds that way. And I'm kind of admiring that. It sounds like that's been a really important part of the management, is the alignment of what you're part of, having fun, running your business. Is that accurate?
Yeah, one of the things, so I was in the corporate world for, 25 years before we bought Mrs. Dunster's, and I was fortunate enough to work mostly in family businesses, with companies like Moosehead Breweries and McCain Foods and people like that. And I think, it was interesting at the time to observe that the values of family business often come from the family. And so when we sit now and we look at our values, which we developed in Scale Up, and our purpose and our culture statement, it very much reflects our family values. And I think one of the most exciting things for Rosalind and I has been the ability to, we very consciously from day one said we want the culture and the values of this organization to be a place where we want to get up and go to work every day. We got to work here too. And so all this bullshit that you put up with in a corporate world, why would we do that in our own world, And so that's been a rewarding part. And also the opportunity to really have an impact. We started with 50 employees, and now there's more than 250 families who directly draw a livelihood from Mrs. Dunster's, and by extension, many more than that. So the rewarding part for us is the impact that we've been able to have, in our communities and the communities in which we do business. It's
You mentioned
pretty significant.
you mentioned it is Scale Up. We talk about the Scale Up Atlantic Canada, which the program itself is called Scalerator, and we run it. We just finished our 37th cohort, by the way.
Congratulations.
Awesome.
It's about 550 companies altogether. What impact, you said it helped you crystallize your purpose statements and values. Did it have other impacts?
I think probably we'd want to talk about celebrating wins. I think that was a huge lesson and game changer for our business. I know you talked about, when you were studying successful businesses, one of the things was that they celebrate wins. And we realized that we were very good at doing that publicly and in the community, but not so great doing it internally. And, because things have to get done quickly. We're making fresh food. It has to get out the door, with the quality and safety in mind. And so we just took a step back and said, okay, you know, there's a lot of wins here, along with all these critical things that we have to deal with every day. And so we kind of changed the culture in our business internally, so that every meeting that we had, whether it was on the floor or the senior management meetings, we start every meeting with wins. And at first, it was a little tough, and people were,
What was hard about it?
yeah, it was awkward, and people were like, I don't have one today, and I'd be like, nope, like whatever it is. And it can be a big win, like we just landed a $1 million of business, or it could be that the maintenance person fixed the latch on the bathroom door. Like, it doesn't matter. And sometimes the little ones add up to a lot more, than the big ones sometimes. So you got to have something. And so we just kept pushing it and pushing it. And now people fight over who's going to go first with their wins, because either they have the same one and they want to steal somebody else's, or they're just excited about how many they have. And so, the challenges are always going to be there. The things you have to deal with daily are always going to be there, and you're going to have to deal with them. But what are the things that have been going really well? And so that has made a huge, huge change in our business for sure.
What context for that, Dan, is, Rosalind and I are walking down, we're winning awards. They're writing newspaper articles about us. We're in magazines where people are high-fiving us on the street, and then we go into work and we close the boardroom door, and everybody's yelling at each other because all we're doing every day, all day, is solving problems associated with growth. And so, that was the disconnect. We're celebrating wins outside externally, but inside we're just solving problems. And the funny thing now is the problems are all still there, but we take a minute to acknowledge the wins before we get into that. And the problems don't seem nearly as bad. We'll talk about the challenges associated with cash flow or growth or whatever, and employees or productivity or that new piece of equipment that's not quite working. Those problems are all still there. But somehow, because we've taken the front end of the meeting to talk about the wins, they're just problems we're trying to solve. and we're not wearing them, on our shoulders.
Good. It sounds like the people are happier in a way. They feel more pride. They feel that things are going, when they're going well, basically they're going well, which makes it easier to fix the things that aren't going so well.
Very
And
much.
that's an important part of your growth. So I'm going to end, I try to make the length of this podcast so that someone can turn it on when they get in their car. I usually say go to the supermarket, but now I'll say go to Mrs. Dunster's and buy some garlic cheese buns, and then it's over by the time they've paid at the checkout. So there's one more question I want to end with, and that is, and I want each of you to answer it. That is, if you met your younger self, and you look too young to have worked somewhere 25 years and another 11 years, but okay, be that as it may, I'm just envious.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
You, Rosalyn, but also you, Blair, you both look young.
Yeah, I know.
You should celebrate that win. But if you met your younger self, let's say 25 years ago, and your younger self was, as you were, wanting to have a business someday of your own, what would you tell them?
I'll go first, maybe, because I can see Rosalyn's thinking. I would say that do it sooner. It's not as hard as you think it is to get started. And, I think one of the things that held us back and holds a lot of people back in our situation is there's a real lack of financial literacy on how to value a business and how to finance a business and how to do, what was the initial acquisition of Mrs. Dunster's. And it took me 25 years to finally, ended up working for a private equity owned company and kind of saw what they were doing and learned. I said, no, this isn't as hard as I think. And then soon thereafter, we were able to pull this transaction together. I wish I'd have known that, maybe not 25 years earlier, because you need some road rash, but I wish I'd have known that 15 years earlier. And so I would say that, do it sooner. If we had when I look at young entrepreneurs today, I go, geez, I wish I had your runway. I really wish I had your runway. And so that would be my advice to myself.
Great. How about you, Rosalyn?
Yeah, I would also agree with that. But I would just say, in terms of us not knowing or understanding at a younger age how to do it, I think one of the other things that contributes to our success is our support that we have around us, having peer groups and mentors. And so I would particularly say, as a young person, having mentors, like if you want to get into business, find some mentors, because if we had done that, maybe we would have found out earlier that we didn't need all the things we thought we needed to get started. And so our mentors that we have been amazing for us and have changed our lives, and staying with our peer groups through the Wallace McCain Institute in Atlantic, Canada. Blair and I each have our own entrepreneur CEO groups, and they've having that support has increased helped us get where we were going faster. I guess is.
I know if I were 25 years younger, I'd certainly want to have you guys as my mentors. With that, I'm going to say thank you both, Rosalyn and Blair Hyslop. Am I pronouncing that correctly, by the way?
Hyslop, yep.
Hyslop.
Yep.
And thank you very much for joining us and sharing your story and sharing your wisdom, your experience with thousands of listeners of Scale Up Podcast. I'll remind everybody, Scale Up Podcast is free. If you like it, well, like it. If you like it, share it. It's only to give you and your friends the ideas, the examples, the stories of people who have brought their companies beyond the 5 million. In this case, we heard already way beyond the 5 million. And again, thank you very much, Blair and Rosalyn, for joining us.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben.